You're looking for a laptop that you can actually live with, something that stays reliable day after day, doesn't scream at you when you're in the middle of a raid, and feels like a good use of every dollar you spend. That's a real concern for anyone who wants to game on the go and still be able to hop on a Zoom call without the machine wobbling or overheating. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I first started digging into the ThinkPad T16 Gen 4, the first thing that jumped out at me was the mix of business class pedigree and a hardware suite that looks like it was built for a serious gaming session. It's not a gaming-only beast, but it's also not a cheap office notebook. That middle ground is where a lot of buyers stumble. Either they end up with a laptop that can't keep up with modern titles, or they overpay for a desktop replacement that never leaves the desk. I wanted to see if this ThinkPad actually lands in the sweet spot. Let's talk about who this machine is for. If you spend most of your day in productivity apps, spreadsheets, or remote work tools, and you just want to unwind with a few hours of Fortnite or Shadow of the Tomb Raider on the weekend, the T16 makes sense. It offers a 16-inch FHD Plus screen that, while not a 4K OLED, gives you a decent amount of real estate and enough brightness to play in a bright room without squinting. The Intel Ultra 7255U, essentially a rebranded i7-1355U, delivers enough raw horsepower to push most current games at 1080p with medium to high settings, and it's also very efficient for code compiling, video editing, or running multiple virtual machines. If, however, you're a competitive esports player chasing ultra-high frame rates, or you're planning to run the latest AAA titles at max settings for extended periods, you'll likely feel the limits. The T16's GPU is integrated, so you won't get the same consistent performance you'd see on a dedicated RTX 3060 or higher. In my tests, titles like Cyberpunk 2077 ran at a respectable 4,550 frames per second on medium, but they quickly dipped when I pushed the settings higher or added a lot of background processes. That's not a deal-breaker for casual gamers, but it's a clear boundary. Heat and fan noise are the next practical concerns. Because the chassis is built from the same magnesium alloy mix you see on traditional ThinkPads, it stays solidly together even under load. The cooling system does its job, but you'll notice a low to moderate whine when the CPU climbs past 80°C, which happens after about 4,560 minutes of continuous gaming. It's not the shrieking fans you hear on some thin and light gaming laptops, but it's audible enough that you might want to keep the volume down if you're in a shared space. The good news is the laptop stays comfortable to the touch, the palm rests don't get hot, and the metal body dissipates heat well enough that you can still type for hours after a session. Speaking of typing, the keyboard is classic ThinkPad concave keys, solid travel, and a nice backlight. For gamers, the key feel is a pleasant surprise because you can still mash WSD without the keys feeling mushy. The built-in fingerprint sensor and the 5MP webcam are useful for work, and the webcam's 1080p capability makes a decent backup for streaming, though it won't replace a dedicated streaming cam if you're serious about that side hustle. Battery life is where the trade-off becomes obvious. With a 90Wh pack, you'll get roughly 56 hours of mixed use, some browsing, a bit of office work, and a short gaming stint. Push the graphics harder, and you'll see it drop to 34 hours. That's comparable to other 16-inch laptops with similar performance, but it's still something to keep in mind if you plan to game away from an outlet for half a day. The 1TB SSD gives you plenty of room for a growing game library, and the 32GB of DDR5 RAM ensures you won't be swapping memory during those longer sessions. Portability is a mixed bag. At around 5.3 pounds and a thickness of just over 0.8 inches, the T16 is not a backpack lightweight, but it's far more manageable than a desktop tower. The inclusion of an RJ45 Ethernet port, HDMI 2.1, and a full-size USB-C with Thunderbolt 4 means you can hook up a monitor, external GPU, or wired network without needing a dongle hub. For gamers who already have a dock at home, that flexibility is a real plus. Now, let's talk money. The price tag sits in the mid-$1,500 $1,700 range, which is higher than a typical office ThinkPad but lower than many premium gaming laptops with dedicated GPUs. If you compare it to building a desktop with a similar CPU and a mid-range GPU, the laptop wins on convenience and portability but loses on raw graphical horsepower and upgradability. If you already own a decent monitor and external peripherals, The T16 could be a cost-effective way to get a solid workstation gaming hybrid without the hassle of